There YouTube, it's Rain here, and I've got for you what I am playing in Standard right now, which is my version on Temur Aggro, and for those of you who have seen, it's kind of like Kibler's List, which I feel like is the better list. Um, just discuss really quickly the differences in the lists. This deck runs a lot more like kind of a monsters deck than an aggro deck. It's like a cross between the two. It's running stuff like it's running aggressive stuff like Knuckle Blade, which obviously is like the core reason to play this deck, Arrow of the Wild, stuff like that. But it's not playing stuff like Rabble Master or other stuff like. But it is a bit of a mix because that deck is typically the deck that main decks Stubborn Denial, and I'm actually maining it in this deck. So yeah, that's one of the things I changed was I put in 3 Stubborn Denials in the main board. I feel like a lot of the matchups are determined based on if you can keep up pressure through their kill spells. And Stubborn Denial is really easy to hold up, just 1 mana, and being able to just play a big guy and have Stubborn Denial as backup so you can keep the pressure on is really powerful. I dropped down to 2 Temur Charms instead of the 3 that the list typically runs. My big issue with Temur Charm is the effect is really powerful, however it takes your whole turn to play it, unlike like Stubborn Denial or even potentially Lightning Strike. 3 mana is just the point where you're pretty much doing nothing else in your turn. So I cut down to 2 of those. I added a Stormbreath Dragon. This list doesn't typically run Stormbreath Dragon. There are a few that do. Stormbreath is really nice against the Abzan decks. It dodges things like Banishing Light, Abzan, Charm, all that. And typically if you can like have a Stormbreath and hold up a Stubborn Denial, the game's pretty much over. Because they'll typically only have like one more answer in like a Hero's Downfall or something like that for it. And after you get that out of the way, you just swing through Monstrous It just like goes crazy and wins you the game. Um, Other things I added to the deck, I added a Nissa. This is a test. I had 1 extra deck slot, and I was thinking about matchups I was really worried about. And the primary matchup I'm actually worried about is like the control decks, like the decks that just keep pumping out answers until I'm out of threats. Um, Nissa is a big one against those decks. She makes a 4/4 every turn um, at very little cost, so I think she'll be. It's a 4/4 haste too for 5, which is already like on the verge of acceptable with the fact that it just has a ton of upside. And she should be a very, very good one in this deck for those matchups. I changed out. Typically, Kibler's List runs 4 Rattleclaw Mystics. I'm running 4 Caryatids instead. The reason I'm doing this is because the problem with Rattleclaw Mystic is it takes so many removal spells. It takes Bile Blight, it takes Magma Jet, Magma Spray, um, Lightning Strike, whatever. It takes all those low damage removal spells, and I just had to calculate, how many times I was playing Rattleclaw Mystic, and the Mystic was dying, versus how many times I needed it to cast spells or offset Pain Lance. And the overwhelming majority of the time, I just needed something to tap for 1 mana of any color, rather than something to potentially attack as well as adding that mana. Um, yeah, that's basically the explanation behind it. It is kind of better against the aggressive decks as well, since it doesn't have to trade with anything. It doesn't have the potential for trading, but it typically lives through a lot of the early aggressive attacks that your opponent will put out at you. For those of you who haven't generally seen the Temur deck before, it's pretty simple base. It's a green-red with some blue in it, running like Arrow of the Wilds as just a really nice 2-drop. Typically, like so easily attacks for 3 and has Death Touch, so it's really hard to want to block it. Siege Rhino, for instance, it just trades with Siege Rhino, and you're not even like mad about it. Yeah, it's a really nice player. Ash Cloud Phoenix. Um, 3 of them in this version is actually so nice. because a lot of people are going to assume that, oh yeah, this leads me to another change I made. I'm sorry, I forgot about it. I took out the Elvish Mystics, and I know every version of this deck is running 4 Elvish Mystics, and I've just played this deck a lot, a lot. And the amount of times that um, the Mystic died, I top decked a Mystic, and it was just the worst possible thing for me. And if I drew a threat, I would have won the game, but I drew an Elvish Mystic instead. Um, the amount of times I've done Forest Elvish Mystic or Foothills Forest Elvish Mystic into just not being able to do like the insane reason to play Elvish Mystic, which is like turn 2 Knuckleblade, um, has just been outnumbered the times I've been able to play um, the turn 2 Knuckleblade. Also, Elvish Mystic is awkward when you want to play a Bivouac turn 1, because like turn 2, 3, 4, etc., you want to start dropping down like threats or potentially your 2-drop ramp, which is my Caryatids. So it just makes it easier to have more threats, be able to play stuff like Stubborn Denial in this version, and just have the slots I need for things I think matter more. So as I was saying, sorry, back to the topic. This deck is a very, very aggressive deck. It's meant to make big turn 3 plays between Caryatid and just like Knuckleblade. You can do stuff like turn 3 Ash Cloud, turn 3 Knuckleblade with haste, turn 3 Pelucranos, play Boon Satyr, like, and like attack with Air of the Wilds for 3 pretty much. So turn 3 is the big explosive turn for this deck, and no deck in the format really matches it on turn 3. Like a Mantis Rider is not in comparison to like Pelucranos, Knuckleblade, those sorts of threats. The deck also is just like, you basically, your game plan is either beat them to death with creatures that are essentially impossible to block. Like Savage Knuckleblade is very, very, very difficult to block. The Abzan decks can't block it with Siege Rhino because you just pump. And Siege Rhino is pretty much a non-factor. It doesn't block Pelucranos, Stormbreath Jack, Pelucranos, Savage Knuckleblade, Ashcloud Phoenix, Stormbreath Dragon. It pretty much doesn't block any of your threats. And once you get them down to a low enough life total, you either Crater's Claws them out, just kill them with creatures, or you can even Lightning Strike them to death. What I've found is it's a very, very, very consistent deck. At its current incarnation, taking out the Elvish Mystics made it a million times more consistent for me. And a very, very brutal deck. It's underplayed by far. It makes up like 5% of the current standard metagame, which is absolutely absurd because I feel like this deck has a great matchup against Abzan. It has a great matchup against Jeskai. And it has a great matchup against the combo decks, the aggro decks. I mean, it just doesn't feel like there's a matchup where you're really scared. Like, as I was saying, kind of blue-black control, but that's when you just side in the last Stubborn Denial, side in Sagu Maulers, Disdainful Strokes, the Sarkon, and just go for it. I mean, that may be the matchup I'm most concerned about is the control matchups, but it doesn't mean I'm at all, like, not favored to win. Alright, so without further ado, let's show you a little bit about how this deck works, and, see how well I can do.